Good Saturday morning, everyone. Today on Perspectives, scientists for years have called it one of the most unique and biodiverse ecological systems in the entire United States, the Mobile Delta. Our guide this morning is Ben Raines, author and environmentalist who has written a new book titled Saving America's Amazon, the threat to our nation's most biodiverse river system. In his book, Raines turns his attention to Alabama's TENSAW Delta. He says that his book celebrates what he says is the most significant of Alabama's waterways, while also chronicling how the system is increasingly at risk. Ben Raines is certainly no stranger to the Mobile TENSAW River Basin. He says that his book is a culmination of 20 years spent covering Alabama and the Gulf Coast as a reporter, primarily focused on the environment. Raines has been a strong advocate for better legislation to protect Alabama's waterways as the state continues to attract big business and industry. He says that it is a delicate balance that we must protect and preserve what we have as Alabama welcomes the business and industry that brings more jobs and fuels our economy. Ben Raines is a writer, naturalist, and a filmmaker who has been reporting on environmental affairs in Alabama for decades. Now, you may remember his name as the man who helped find what archaeologists believe is the CLOTILDA, the last known U.S. slave ship to bring captives from Africa to the United States. The remains of the CLOTILDA, by the way, are said to be near 12 Mile Island, which is part of the Mobile TENSAW River Delta ecosystem. Since that historic find, efforts to preserve and promote the section of Mobile known as AFRICATOWN continues to gain momentum and worldwide attention. AFRICATOWN was a place where the people who were brought to Alabama as captives on the CLOTILDA eventually settled and built their own unique community that preserved customs and tribal cultural traditions well into the 20th century. A conversation with Ben Raines when Perspectives continues after this quick break. Our guest this morning, Ben Raines. We classify Ben as environmental journalist, filmmaker, and naturalist, a licensed charter captain, and also leads adventure tours. And Ben, of course, known for some incredible work talking about the environment and, of course, the great outdoors. Thanks for joining us here this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here and be in person, so to speak.
Exactly, exactly. Well, listen, Ben, we're talking this morning focused on Saving America's Amazon, your new book that is sort of a culmination of 20 years of work, but also tying in, there we go, tying into some of the great work that you've done about the Mobile Bay and the rivers, as well as Alabama itself as a state of what we call America's Amazon. Why did you put this in book form?
Well, you know, it's kind of, I was born in Alabama, and my whole family's from Alabama, but I left at an early age, and the Alabama I knew from visiting and stuff was so unconnected to the Alabama I started discovering as an environment reporter. You know, figuring out that Alabama has more species of fish, turtles, all kinds of plants, more than twice as many species per square mile as any other state, blew me away. And at the same time, as an environment reporter, I started seeing how the state was being damaged by industry and our neglect, you know, those of us using, you know, as homeowners and stuff. And so I kind of wanted to put everything I knew in one place where people could read it, and it would make them fall in love with the state, it would make them care about it, and it would tell them what to do and how to help and how to try and protect this incredible place we have.
In the book, you talk about how the change of journalism, media has really affected the environment because some of the people who were in place to safeguard this are no longer writing for the major newspapers because of all the changes there. And then, of course, the way you mentioned the fractured media. Talk about that a bit, about what has also changed for some of those safeguards.
Yeah, well, so the media has always played an outsized importance in Alabama in connecting people to what's going on with the environment, because as a state, we spend less than any other state in the country to protect the environment. Now, I talked about how we have so many creatures and all that. We also are the leader in extinctions in the continental U.S. And more than half of all extinctions that have happened since the 1850s in America have happened in Alabama. So when the media, particularly when our three largest papers, which are all owned by the Advance Corporation, Newhouse, when they gutted the papers, you know, our newsroom in Mobile at the Press Register, we had 94 people in the newsroom. Today they have 3. They have 3 reporters, down from a staff of 94. And that's statewide. And it's not just the Advance papers. The other papers have experienced a similar shrinking. Television, I think y'all may have done a little better in terms of, you know, keeping your numbers up and stuff. But the newspapers played this really critical role in doing those kind of in-depth stories that, you know, took time, and because one reporter could go instead of a camera crew, you know, so you could cover that stuff a little more. And we've lost that. And the industries have noticed. You know, basically there's no one watching the hen house. We have the least funded environmental agency in the country, which is already trying to not find problems, you know. So we've lost this army of reporters across the state who could hear about something bad happening in their neighborhood or their town or whatever and write about it and bring it to public attention. And so it's more important than ever for our environmental groups to get, you know, for us to support them. One of the things I always say about Alabama is we're about 20 years behind the rest of the country in terms of the environment, in terms of how we protect it, and even how we use it. You know, ecotourism has been a thing in the rest of the country for decades, and it's just getting going here in Alabama, and we have such an opportunity. You know, we have made this mistake in Alabama of importing our economies in a lot of ways, bringing in businesses, whether it was timber companies or steel mills or now car makers. The problem when you bring in industry like that, you bring in your economy, is it can leave, and we've seen that. You know, we've seen the steel mills shut down, we've seen the textile factories shut down, and it could happen with these car factories. But we have a homegrown opportunity here with the environment to make an ecotourism industry, and we see its power when we look out in the Gulf and you see the charter boat fleet and the business on the you know, at the beach. That's $1 billion industry in Baldwin County.
Right.
You know, and so what we need to do as a state is embrace what we have, which has always made Alabama special, which is this landscape beneath our feet and the rivers and waters and stuff. That's Alabama's real treasure. And you know, when I mentioned we have more species of plants and animals per square mile than any other state, that right there is a draw. And I've seen it with the book. Next week I'm taking a group from New York for 4 days in a row, and they're coming because of the book. I've had people from California lately, I've had people from Seattle, people from multiple families from Chicago of all places. And they're coming because they're seeing Alabama as a magical place. They're seeing it, what I present in the book, and they want to come here because you can't see these things where they are.
That's a good drawing card.
Yeah.
In the foreword in the book, you and Edward Wilson, you address the point of we can see things in Alabama that existed thousands of years ago, that some things have not changed in that period of time.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we have so much diversity. That's why we have all those plants and animals. When the glaciers came in the last ice age, America was frozen. You know, you go to Michigan, New York, all those places, they were under a sheet of ice a mile thick. But Alabama never froze. It was a little colder here, but everything that's ever evolved here is still here. And you can see that in things like the red hill salamander, you know, which is like a duck-billed platypus of an animal. There's nothing else like it in the natural world, and it's only here in Alabama.
We also talk about some of the other species. I love the way your book just sort of, I guess it draws you in, and you all of a sudden you can't release it because you're learning something new as you go along the way about the biodiversity in Alabama. And you talk about even the flowers, to where the camellia shouldn't be the state flower. Yeah. Now get that. You know, we think about that for a minute. In Alabama, we have more species of flowering plants than you can find almost anywhere else in the world. And our state flower is a camellia native to China, Korea, and Japan. That's just absurd. You know, how could that be? But it's the story of Alabama. We don't appreciate what we have around us. And we look elsewhere because we think, oh wow, that looks nice. And I think it's time for us to celebrate what we have and what we are. And I think Alabama's going to come into its own. And so right now, it's a critical time for people to embrace the state and the landscape around them and start realizing it is valuable, it is important, and it is worth protecting. And I was hoping you were going to mention that pink orchid, that we have so many species of orchids here also, that that should be the state flower.
Well, absolutely. In fact, I was out at the Splinter Hill Bog last week filming for my new documentary, and there were 4 different orchid species blooming at once. There was that big pink one.
Wow.
I mean, it's incredible. Imagine that. We have 54 species of orchids, and these are big, showy orchids that look like what you'd buy at Home Depot or Lowe's or the grocery store. You know, that astounded me when I learned we had not 1 orchid species, but 54. We have orchids that live in trees. I mean, that's incredible.
We are very rich in that. Well, we're going to take a break, Ben. When we come back, we're going to talk more, because there are some other facts and figures that you have that will really astound people, and hopefully they'll want to even more get a hold of this book and read this, because what an incredible place that we call home here, Alabama. Our guest this morning, Ben Raines, will be talking more about his new book, Saving America's Amazon, here on Perspectives this morning in just a moment. And our guest this morning, Ben Raines, as we're talking about his new book, Saving America's Amazon, here on Perspectives this morning. And Ben, some of the facts and the information that you shared with me: 77,000 miles of flowing rivers and creeks, and of course, more species of fish, mussels, snails, and crawfish. And we're near Louisiana, but yet Alabama is the greatest home to crawfish in America.
Yeah, well, and not just America, the entire world. Alabama is the global center of diversity for crawfish species. So Louisiana, you mentioned, everybody thinks of crawfish in Louisiana. They have 32 species. Alabama has 97 species of crawfish.
My goodness.
When I started writing the book, we only had 84. We found that many new species in the couple of years I worked on the book. And then look statewide, or countrywide rather. California has 9 species compared to our 97. The state of Washington has 1. All of Europe has 4 species of crawfish, and one of those is an American species we have here in Alabama. So, you know, when we talk about this diversity, look at the turtles. The Mobile River system, which drains most of Alabama, has more species of turtles than any other river system anywhere on Earth. The entire planet. That is a staggering statistic.
That really is. Well, Ben, one of the things that you mentioned in the book, I think that really caught my attention, is that Alabama was being studied back and celebrated well back in the 1800s in Europe, and even the development of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, Alabama sort of played a role in that as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. And, you know, the Smithsonian Institution was all over in Alabama in the early 1800s collecting dinosaur fossils and things. And that's what drew this guy, Charles Lyell, who's the father of modern geology. He came here in the 1850s specifically to see the fossils on the Alabama River, the Claiborne Bluff area. And what he saw there, he was able to compare to what he was seeing in England and France, and he figured out that there were species there that were also here, you know, because Alabama at that point, like much of America, was underwater. He was seeing these species in the fossil record on both sides of the ocean. But he was also seeing some species here that he wasn't seeing over there. And so he realized things were evolving here that weren't evolving over there, and some things were dying out. And then he figured out that for this to be happening, for species to exist and then disappear, this would take millions of years. At the time, people generally thought the world was about 6,000 years old. And so this guy came to Alabama, and that's where he was able to figure out the world was much older, and he got the seeds of evolution, of that whole idea, and became Darwin's mentor. So when Charles Darwin went to the Galapagos, when he sailed there and came up with the whole theory of evolution, he wrote in his journals, "I'm seeing the world through Lyell's eyes."
My goodness.
And he was talking about Lyell here in Alabama. Right. Which is, you know, I mean, who knew?
Yeah. And speaking of that, Ben, one of my grandsons is a big dinosaur fan. Tell us about the king of lizards.
Well, so, you know, I guess you're talking about the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yes. No, I'm speaking of...
We have the Basilosaurus
here in Alabama.
Yeah. This is the Basilosaurus. This was a dinosaur-era whale that hunted other dinosaurs. And these things were about 60 feet long. Their teeth were as big as my hand. So they were finding these all over in the 1800s. People still find them today around Monroeville and that area. These animals were so big, their backbone things were used as foundations for houses and as chairs. And you can actually go places and see houses that are built on these dinosaur bones that farmers were finding in the fields in Alabama. And so they took some of these dinosaurs and toured the world with them. Specifically the Basilosaurus. Its teeth are staggered like my hand, so they're serrated. They're incredible looking. So imagine this Alabama dinosaur travels the world, and you know, you can go see Alabama Basilosaurus, this 65-foot long monster, in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. right now, where it has been on display since 1835.
My goodness. Now, you also talk about some of the areas in past times were coral reefs that we now consider valleys and hills in other parts of the state.
Right, and so a perfect example is the Red Hills, the area up the Alabama River about 90 miles north of Mobile, near Monroeville. That area, those hills are old coral reefs. And so what's happened is the sediments in between the reefs have washed away, so we have these hills and ridges, but they're made out of old coral. Which is quite a fascinating thing, but it has made a whole ecosystem up there that is much richer than a lot of places because of the influence of the coral mixing with the sediments and the dirt. You know, so they're very rich dirt there. In fact, among the richest on Earth, especially in terms of tree diversity. So for a long time, people thought the Great Smoky National Park in Tennessee was the center of oak tree diversity on Earth, because in that park, which is several 100,000 square miles, or acres rather, they have 15 species of oak trees. Well, a scientific analysis about 5 years ago in the Red Hills, north of Mobile, they found 20 species of oak trees growing on a single hillside. Just one hill had more species of oak trees than you can find anywhere else in any other forest on the planet.
On the planet?
On the planet.
My goodness.
The global center of oak tree diversity, and turtles, and crawfish, and all these other things. You know, we haven't mentioned the fish.
Right.
We have 450 species of fish in Alabama. That is a third of all known freshwater fish in the United States.
Right here in the state.
It's staggering.
America's Amazon. Now, as we let's get into that area of what we need to be doing to maintain this, Ben. The fall of 2016 proved to be sort of a forebearer of things that could happen and be worse. Give us an idea of what happened in 2016 with the rivers.
Well, we had a drought, and it was a quick drought, and it kind of caught everyone unexpectedly, and our rivers got sucked dry. The Cahaba River, one of the most diverse rivers on Earth, has more species in its little 150-mile run than the entire state of California, ran dry around the city of Trussville because industry and golf courses and farms and everything were allowed to suck all the water out. And so this river ran dry. It only started flowing again downstream of Trussville. The entire flow of one of the most diverse rivers in the nation and on Earth was made up of treated sewage coming out of Trussville.
Oh my goodness.
We do not have laws that protect our rivers and make sure they keep flowing. In Alabama, what we have instead are laws that protect the right of industry to use our rivers no matter the ecological damage that's happening.
Ben, take about a minute and tell us what we need to do.
What we need to do is embrace our diversity, be proud of it, and start protecting it. You know, our politicians aren't going to do it because they don't understand it. So we need to take our environmental groups and join them. You know, don't join one, join all of them. Join Mobile Baykeeper, join the Alabama Coastal Foundation, join the South Alabama Land Trust, join the Nature Conservancy. You know, it's like $30, $40 a year to join one of these. But if all of our groups have a whole lot of members, they're that much stronger when they show up in Montgomery to talk to the politicians and defend the natural world. So that, my main message to people right now, join your groups, help them get bigger and stronger. It's what's helped all around the country, and now it's time for that to help in Alabama. You know, the natural world needs a voice, and that voice is us. We're the voice of the planet, and in Alabama, we have not been shouting loud enough. We need to do that now.
Well, Ben, our book, Saving America's Amazon, tell us where we can find it, and I think anyone who picks it up will definitely be enthused, as well as wanting to know what more can they do.
So you can definitely get it at the Page and Palette in Fairhope. I have to say, I went in the Books A Million in Mobile the other day, and they had no copies, and I was really upset. The Barnes & Noble had a bunch of copies. You can certainly get it online. It's a great book. I hope people will read it. It is my love letter to our state, and our state definitely deserves our love.
Ben Raines, we appreciate you, and of course what you now put into book form, and definitely need it because we've got to save America's Amazon. Thanks for joining us today on Perspectives.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric. I really appreciate it.
For more information on the Mobile Delta, check out Ben's website, americasamazonadventures.com. Now, you can also reach Ben via Facebook or Twitter. His new book, once again titled Saving America's Amazon, The Threat to Our Nation's Most Biodiverse River System. We hear the news stories more often today than ever before. Businesses and large, small ones, victims of cyber attacks. Hackers placing malware in their computer operating systems, holding their corporate data for ransom, and then demanding huge payments. The Colonial Pipeline, $4.4 million. Meat supplier JBS, $11 million. Now, as we speak, 1,500 businesses are now victims of what officials call criminal extortion rings. Perspectives talks to a local security company executive on how to protect your business and your personal data. That's next Saturday morning at 9. So please join us then Saturday morning at 9 for Perspectives as we discuss those important issues and seek solutions. If you have any ideas of topics, please drop us a line here at perspectives@fox10tv.com. I'm Eric Reynolds. Have a great week, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks for watching Fox 10 News. Watch us live wherever you are, on our mobile, our streaming news app, and you can also watch us on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV.